I know how it feel to wake up, fucked up, pockets broke as hell, another rock to sell. People look at you like you's the user, selling drugs to all the losers, mad Buddha abuser. But they don't know about your stress-filled day, baby on the way, mad bills to pay. That's why you drink Tanqueray, so you can reminisce and wish you wasn't living so devilish. Shit, I remember I was just like you, smoking blunts with my crew, flipping over 62s, cause GED wasn't BIG, I had to get PA.
Alright y'all, so we back. Yeah, I ain't never done a video this early before, but I really feel like I need to touch on this subject in light of this whole Jay-Z situation. I've been seeing a lot of YouTubers talking about it, and let me be clear about this. This video isn't going to be talking about Jay-Z, because I know that's probably what y'all was expecting, just because the video was called The Metaphysics of Selling Your Soul, and then I just brought up Jay-Z. But nah, I'm gonna break the whole thing down about how Jay-Z was the replacement for Biggie when I do the podcast about Biggie. So y'all just gonna have to wait on that. But with all of that being said, man, congrats to Jay, man. It ain't a lot of us out there, whether we're famous or whether we're just normal day-to-day living type of people, who can even say that we touched 500 million, 600 million, 700 million, let alone a whole billion. So anybody who's able to make it out here in this game and come out on top on a non-moral standpoint, you have to get him some type of congrats, man, because like I say, not a lot of us are able to reach a pinnacle that high, especially if you were somebody that came up in the game. Because giving y'all a little more of a tidbit of what I'm gonna talk about in the Tupac and Biggie series podcast, both Biggie and Tupac got into the drug game, but their reasons for getting in the drug game were kind of the same, but the reasons why they got out of the drug game were different. See, when Biggie was coming up, and I'm gonna explain this a lot more when I do his podcast, Biggie came up with the soul and the mindset of a hustler at an early age. His friends would talk about when Biggie was young, like in elementary school young, he rode around with the same pack of dudes, and in those pack of dudes, Biggie was always the boss, and he was the one that gave everybody else their jobs. He gave everybody else their nickname, and with him and his friends, they ran a mafia style friendship. And as you can see, that carried on to him being a musician by creating Junior Mafia. Now, until later on in Biggie's life, Biggie really didn't have a definitive reason to go out and start selling drugs and stuff like that, because as far as his home life was concerned, he was raised up in a non-struggling type of environment. You know, his mom was a teacher and all of that, and it wasn't like they just came out of the projects. But the common denominator with Tupac and Biggie was that both of them never had a father figure type of person in their life to steer them away from doing mischievous things, especially getting in the game. So Biggie started to see the street life as something that's more profitable and something that's more of authority than the square world, which is going to school and getting good grades and stuff like that. And plus, it was just certain things that he wanted that he knew that his mom wouldn't be able to just give him like that. But he knew that if he was able to hustle a little bit with his boys, they can come up. And just like Biggie said himself, he never really looked at himself as an artist, being as profitable as he was in the game. So the reason why he eventually ended up getting out of the game was because he started to see that the money that he was making rapping was just enough, if not more, of what he was making in the game. So he was like, shit, why don't I just parlay all of my energy that I'm using and take some of my experiences with me being in the game and just put it all on wax, since y'all like it so much, and I'm gonna take all the things that I learned in the game and just parlay it to this music thing. And all in all, that's what made Biggie so popular, because see, Biggie, he had a lot of street fame starting out. So before Biggie hit the main screen, he already had a good home base of loyal fans from the streets. Now let's take Tupac's situation. Now Tupac, not going too much into his life on this particular video, he was born to be a warrior god. If anyone knows about Tupac, how he came up, how he was raised from a mother that was pregnant with him while she was in prison and all of that type of stuff, raised by a Panther, somebody who's been on the FBI watch list his whole life. But see, coming up, Tupac started out on the light side, and not going too much into detail now, but he didn't get into quote unquote the game until later on in his life. And this was around the time where he started going through a whole lot of trauma, because unlike Biggie's situation, Tupac's mom was never really able to do the things that she wanted to do simply because of who she was. So every time Tupac mom would try to get a job or try to get a new position or anything like that, it was extremely hard. So Tupac, being the type of person that he was, he hated seeing his mom in that position. So he would try to hustle and do things just to help out around the house and bring more money so that they won't have to struggle as bad as they were struggling. But see, the difference with Tupac, the same thing that I was saying about the enlightened man, Tupac had a very, very big heart, which is something that if you're in this game, that's going to be a major, major problem. Because I can't lie, you got to do some very heartless shit. Just like Dr. B always say, you have to do some very unscrupulous. I don't even know if I said that right. But you got to do some very, very heartless shit, man, when you in this game. And with Tupac, it just got to the point where he just couldn't stomach it anymore. I mean, seeing people that he know and seeing their moms and aunties and all of that kind of stuff come to him for a fix and all of that. And now he got to look his friends in the face and act like he didn't just do what he did, because see, his friends don't even know that their mom is strung out. His friend don't even know that his auntie is strung out and all of that. And he got to go to sleep with that on his mind. And then what really made him stop and what really hit home for Pac is when his mama got strung out. That's when things really took a toll for Tupac. And that's when he decided that he wanted to start using his music not only to give those kids who was in that situation and maybe their mom was strung out, or maybe they were struggling and they was thinking about getting in the game and all of that stuff. So he would use his music to give them a voice, to make them feel like they're not alone, and that with the help of all of us, maybe we can rise up and create a heaven in the ghetto, so our mamas don't gotta struggle and be strung out like they were, and so that our brothers and sisters don't have to resort to selling drugs and robbing niggas and sticking niggas up and carjacking and all of that stuff just to make money, because of the system of soulless beings don't even want to hire you half the time and all of this stuff. And this was a rage that started to really build up inside of Tupac from early on in his life, and this is where the whole thug life concept came from. And I'm gonna stop there. So it's people that come from this type of situation and they got talent that's undeniable. They're like diamonds in the rough in their hood and things like that. When it comes to this system of soulless beings, they look for people like him and people like Biggie on a daily basis, because since they already feel like they're doomed from the start and they really don't know how much their soul, how much that innocence is truly worth, they'll be quick to sell it. And then once they mature in that side of the game, aka the J. Cole curse. And if y'all don't know what the J. Cole curse is, y'all got to go back and listen to that podcast that I did about Aaliyah. I think it was the third part, or it might have been part 2, but I really think it was part 3 though. And pretty much you really start to have a midlife crisis as well as a nervous breakdown all in one, because that's when you start to see that you were truly trapped. And just like Diddy's album, there's no way out. And there was a reason why Diddy named that album No Way Out, but I'm gonna get into that later too. So before I really get into this, I want to give credit where credit is due, because a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be saying is going to be actually derived from a video that young Pharoh came out with. And I think this was back in like 2015 or 2016 when he came out with that video. And I don't know if it was called How to Sell Your Soul or whatever, but if I find it and if he haven't taken it down, I'll definitely put it in the bottom description of this video, because I know a lot of people looked at his rendition of it and they were still confused, talking about his pseudo and all of that type of stuff. So I want to see, can I break it down a little more? Now I'm going to throw this disclaimer out here like I always do. This isn't the end all be all, meaning that this isn't how it's done all the time, because like they say, there are many ways to skin a cat. But for black people, I'm starting to see this pattern being used a lot more, especially in this music industry that we're in now. So going back to the rant video that I did a couple days ago, when I was talking about how innocence doesn't make you blue pill, I talked about how if you're a person that went through a lot of trauma in your life and you was always talked about for who you really were, and this was at a time in your life where your solar body and your emotional body was connected, and for those people who feel like that their originality and their authenticity isn't enough and they don't have that self-improvement type of thing to where they're just gonna create their own lane and they don't give a fuck about what anyone says, that takes a very, very heavy dose of confidence, willpower, charisma, and just overall having a balanced mental and physical body. But you know, when you're young, a lot of that for a lot of people isn't fully developed just yet. So sometimes you get in that phase where you just want to fit in. Now, this is when you start to create these things called alter egos. Now, if this is the way you created your alter ego of yourself, that means that you did it in a place of trauma, and we call those trauma bodies. I don't know if anybody else coined that term, but I'm gonna coin it. along with all of the other little phrases and words that I use. Now, your trauma body and your solar body are what's connected to your ego. And whichever one of those bodies are sending out the most energy to your ego, that's what's going to determine if your ego gets big or small. Now, your ego is what lives in your mental body, because all your ego really is just internally what you think about yourself versus what you perceive people to think about you. So your ego technically isn't a bad thing. Even in some cases, if you have a big ego, it's not really a bad thing. The only way it could be a bad thing is if your ego starts drawing too much from your trauma body and your solar body is so disconnected. That's why you see a lot of these celebrities out here, when they go into their altered ego, it's like they're a totally different person, because trauma is a very dense and a very negative type of energy, and it's food for spiritual parasites and demonic entities. And I'm gonna get into that a little bit later. Now, for a person whose trauma body and solar body is connecting with their ego in a balanced type of manner, this person will be perceived as someone who's humble, because his ego isn't so big to the point where he can't accept positive criticism from the people that's close to him, and also to help those that are truly in need. But due to him still having some of that trauma body energy in his ego, he's gonna make sure that if he does help someone, it's someone who truly needs it, and he's still gonna stand firm in his principles and codes, because at the end of the day, he came from a lot. He went through a lot to come up and get to this level. And the last thing that he wants to happen is for him to lose it all because he was being quote unquote too nice and trying to save everybody, when they had the same ample opportunities to get what you got, and they just refused to put that elbow grease and put that grind in to get what you got. Now that's somebody with a balanced ego. And people who have balanced egos, they can go through the most scrutiny and still come out on top on the back end. A good example of this would be somebody like Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson was one of the most humble dudes that you would ever meet in your life. Michael Jackson gave so much money to charity and created so many things for the less fortunate and stuff like that still haven't been televised and put all over the media. Michael Jackson, he used to do a lot to help those in need, especially to help those children that are in need too. Whether they had cancer or they had some type of incurable disease or something like that, Michael Jackson was always quick to help somebody. And even in his music, he made the type of music that if you was down or you felt like you was alone or you just felt like you needed a friend, you could listen to Michael Jackson's music and it'll be soothing and it'll be comforting. Now, on the business side, Michael Jackson was no pushover. Just like Dick Gregory pointed out, you don't get half ownership of Sony and the Beatles catalog and all of that stuff being no pushover and being no pussy. So when it came to the business of music, Michael Jackson, he didn't play about his. That voice will get deep on y'all real quick if you play with him about his money. And you know what? I can't do nothing but respect it, because Michael Jackson, he deserved every penny he got. And to be honest with you, he deserved more than that. I can also say the same thing about Prince. Shout out to the ancestor Prince, because his birthday just passed by. And it was real fucked up how they did Prince, because his name is actually Prince. And they fixed it where he couldn't even use his own name for a while and put music out. So Prince had to end up turning his whole existence into a symbol, so that way he can still put out music, which was genius if you really think about it. But it's like Prince was so big as an artist already, we were still calling him Prince, even though he couldn't call himself Prince. Now, when we talk about somebody with an imbalanced ego, either way, it can still go either good or bad. That's the tricky thing about the ego, because to be honest with you, the ego is that middle ground between your mental and physical body and your emotional and solar body. Y'all excuse the noise outside because it just started raining, so y'all hearing that rain in the background. Y'all know how Florida is, so this rain is probably gonna last for like 25 minutes and then it's gonna go right back to being sunny again. So back to your ego. If your trauma body is mainly what fills your ego up, the positive side of that is gonna be your mentality is that you're gonna have a super hard working, I gotta grind, I gotta get it by any means necessary because ain't nobody gonna hand it to me. I gotta go out here and grab this shit by the horns and give it my all. Team no sleep, I sleep when I die. By any means necessary, I gotta grind. And in a lot of ways that shows, because this is all across the board. People who went through the most trauma, they got some of the best work ethic, especially if they dealt with some trauma that they almost died in or something like that. So they got that you only live once and life is already too short type of mentality. Like I always say, these celebrities who went through the most trauma, these people who went through the most trauma, they have some of the greatest success stories. And success is what inflates their ego, sometimes to oblivion though, on the cons side of the game. Because in a lot of ways, when you coming from a very traumatic type of environment where it's hard for you to trust people, it's hard for you to give other people the reins so you can do other things. You have to do everything on your own type shit. It can be very straining and very exhausting physically and emotionally, to the point where when you finally make it to the top, you damn near heartless. And a lot of people, if they don't watch out and get that therapy, they can turn into misers with the success. They can turn into hermits sometime, because if you don't develop the right type of business relationships with people and stuff like that, it's going to be hard to make your success expand, because at the end of the day, you can't do everything alone. You'll end up killing yourself. And in a lot of ways, that's what ends up happening. When their success dies, their ego dies. And when their ego dies, they lose their will to live. Even when it comes to that point to where now they've made it to the top. So they're at the point financially and mentally, with the wisdom that they've gained, that if they really wanted to, they can come back down to the environment of people where he came from, where he starts to run across those young guys or young women that was once in his position, and now he's at a position himself, or she's at a position herself, to where now they can help those people get to the level that he's now at, or she's now at. And the thing about it is, if your emotional body and your solar body are working in unison with each other, you'll be able to spot those upcoming light being guys and those upcoming light goddess women that you could help out, and they would appreciate your contribution to their success. But the thing about it is, since your ego is so imbalanced, because you still got trauma in your trauma body that you haven't let go of yet, you got that mentality of, man, fuck them niggas, fuck them bitches. Because when I was down and I didn't have nothing, I had to get it out the mud on my own. I ain't have no help. So just like I had to get it out the mud by myself, y'all niggas and y'all bitches better get it out the mud y'all self too. Because I went through hella shit to get to where I'm at. And the last thing I'm finna do is to help somebody that was probably plotting on my downfall to begin with. Now, you have no proof of this, but this is just your mindset of thinking. So you come off as a person who's egotistical. You come off as being a miser, being self-centered, toxically selfish. Someone, if you try to give them some advice or something like that, they take it as you're talking about them or you're trying to put them down, so they can't accept no type of criticism. They think they're the best thing since sliced bread, which is how you should think about yourself, but it's imbalanced. None of us is perfect. And lastly, when they see the younger generation of them trying to come up in their lane, even if it's a situation to where it's innocent and they're just trying to pay homage to you, since your ego is built around a toxic trauma body, because face it, we've all been through something in our lives that gave us trauma. It might not be something big in my eyes or big in someone else's eyes, but you as a person that's watching this video, y'all can't lie and say y'all never been through any type of trauma at all. So we all have a trauma body, and having a trauma body connected with your ego in a way when it's balanced is good, because when you go through something that's bad, let's say you touched fire for the first time and you burnt your hand a little bit, your trauma body now remembers that experience. So when you come across that situation again, you don't put your hand in the fire, because you remember that experience where that fire burnt you. Now that's something that's positive that can be in your trauma body. Now, something negative in your trauma body can be a situation to where you came out the house all swagged out, looking good, and you go approach a woman and that woman rejects you, and you start to internalize that feeling of rejection. And now you put that experience, that negative experience, in your trauma body, and you just decide that I'll never approach another woman again because of that one experience that you went through. Now, that's something that's negative that's in your trauma body that you need to get some therapy and let that go. Just like Aaliyah said, if at first you don't succeed, pick yourself up and try again. Because if you fill up your trauma body with too many of those type of experiences, that's what makes it toxic. And you feeding that to your ego, that's what makes you egotistical. And lastly, someone whose ego was inflated by their trauma body and they receive success, the thing about it is, had they just been a little bit more balanced and humble, they probably could have had greater success and more expanded success. But due to their hard heart and trauma-based mentality, that they feel like everybody's out to get them if they let their guard down or whatever, they pass up on really, really beneficial opportunities. They pass up on really, really beneficial relationships. And for those people who have those large egos and they have that success, God forbid, if anything's happened to them physically, or if anything happens to them emotionally where they go through a depression or something like that, because face it, when you fill up your ego with something as dense as trauma and negative energy is, that ego starts to get heavy, and that ego starts to weigh down on you, because the battle isn't just getting success. The battle is how long are you going to keep that success. And if you was always looked at as one way, there's a lot of stress on you, because like I say, nobody is perfect, and no matter how you try, everybody fails sometime. But since they don't look at failure as a stepping stone or a setup for your comeback, when these type of people fail, they take it very, very hard internally, and when they fall, they crash and burn hard too. And when they crash and burn, they don't really have anybody to fall back on, because their whole life they've been shutting people out, because they never felt like they could trust anybody. They never felt like they could confide in anybody. Now, it's lonely at the top regardless, but for these type of people, it can be lonely and stressful at the top, because just like being an alpha male, there's never really a finish line when it comes to it, unless you create it. If you're going by this world that we live in, there's never really going to be a point in your life where you can say that you reached the peak of being alpha, unless you've decided in your heart of hearts that you're ready to go to that other stage, which is the enlightened man. So for a minute, let me talk about the person who has too much of their solar body that their ego is pulling from, and there's not enough in their trauma body to balance it out. Now, these are the people, when they came up, nobody really knew what they could do, or nobody really paid attention to them like that, because they was never one to really showcase their gifts and talents and stuff like that. And if they did, they wasn't flossy with it. And even when people tried to give them accolades and congratulations, they would respectfully decline, or they would be quick to let someone else get the glory, because they never really thought too highly of themselves in that type of regard. Now, on the positive side, if someone that's in a high position of power sees that type of person with a spirit and a soul like that, that person has the potential to be even more successful as the or girl in my last example, simply because his or her humility is what people are gonna always remember about them. And it's just something about someone who's truly humble. They're so easy to work with, and it's like a pleasure every time they do something with you or something like that, because you know at the end of the day everything will be balanced when it comes to collabing with others, and there won't be no big egos in the way and all of that type of stuff. And like I said, the person in this example, they get a lot more opportunities thrown at them, because people just like working with humble people. And this person has a lot of instances where they can expand and prolong their success. But if they lose it all, these people would still have something to be happy about, because they're drawing their energy from something that's beyond this world that we live in. They're drawing their energy from something beyond what this world gave to them. So if they lose all of their worldly possessions, for the most part, their ego can still live on as someone positive. And even if they do lose it all, they're always going to have someone who's going to remember how humble they were and help them out. Now, here are the cons of that, because in a perfect world, there shouldn't be any cons to this. But in this system that we live in, that prey on those type of innocent people, unfortunately, if this type of person don't develop a proverbial backbone before they reach their success, unfortunately, they would never reach the success. Now, let me explain that. If there's a person and they just got this really big talent of something, no matter what it is, but they're so humble about it that they just give this information out, whatever it is, for free, because they see people in need that needs the information, whether it's a song or whether it's an idea that can help revolutionize something or whatever. And the people that they help, they could be genuinely thankful that he or she helped them. But see, there's always going to be a group of people that's going to be waiting in the wings, looking for that next big thing. And if they see someone who's humble like that, running their mouth, telling all of their great ideas and doing all of this stuff, and they haven't covered themselves spiritually and physically. Spiritually meaning that if those group of people try to steal his or her idea, they're so covered spiritually that bad things, even death, would happen to those group of people who stole that idea of that righteous person. Because at the end of the day, if you think you're going to mess with God's children and fuck them over, you got another thing coming. Or physically, you didn't copyright your idea, you didn't trademark your idea, you didn't do the necessary legal things to where if somebody tried to steal your idea or something like that, they would have legal consequences. A lot of these people whose ego isn't strong, they don't even think about that type of stuff. All they're thinking about is they just want to help people. They just want to sing. They just want to act, or whatever it is, whatever talent that they have. They just want to do that, and they don't care if they get paid, or they don't care if they don't have a lawyer to copyright their stuff or none of that, because they just do it out of the kindness of their heart. And these are the people who get taken advantage of the most. But you know what they say? The truth always comes to the light. And the worst thing ever is if you had a real good idea or something and someone stole it and turned it into a multi-million-dollar business or turned it into a multi-billion-dollar company, but you have no rights to it. So even if something happens to where the truth comes out, there's still really nothing that you can really do about it, because since you didn't do the necessary legal work or the necessary spiritual work to protect your light, which is your ideas and your genuine talent, you're assed out. And to be honest with you, these type of people, when they pass away and when they leave the earth and their story finally gets told, it can be very, very saddening, because seeing someone that had that type of potential to be that great and it not even happen, or it happened but it was in somebody else's name, man. And that goes back to the podcast that I did about Left Eye, and how that whole TLC group was originated by Crystal Jones and Ian Burke. But as soon as TLC decided to go mainstream with Pebbles, she took Crystal Jones out the group and replaced her with Chili, and then just took the whole name and just took everything from Crystal Jones. And she had a real hard life after that. So that goes to show you that either way, too much of anything can be bad. Too much of anything can be toxic when we're talking about energy. Now, I bet y'all thinking, what does all of this have to do with selling your soul? Because that's what this video is supposed to be about, right? Now, let me clear things up. When you sell your soul, you're not literally like taking something out of your body and giving it to somebody or whatever. And in a lot of ways, I can go very, very deep with this subject, but I'm gonna try to keep it at a level where most people can understand it. So back in the day, when you would have black entertainers and stuff like that enter the music industry and they get into Hollywood and all of that, see, this system of soulless beings, since they use our ancient information, just like how we would have someone who is born and we give that baby to an elder, and that elder would be able to tell you what type of man or what type of woman that baby was going to grow up to be. And if that child had a certain spirit about him or about her that was that of a potential king or a potential queen or a potential army general or something like that, you would be raised up in a certain way that aligns with that type of path. So this system of soulless beings will keep a close watch in the rough black neighborhoods, looking for those quote unquote diamonds in the rough, looking for that ghetto boy or that ghetto girl who just had this huge talent. But since they was operating in an environment that's based around trauma, they could easily be controlled by the system of soulless beings who created their system based around monetary power. And since their system is more dominant, most people now would symbolize money as a symbol of power, because money is our main form of currency. And how can you have power if you don't have a lot of current? See? A little wordplay there for you. Now, the thing is, in order for these soulless beings to stay in power, they have to make sure that their face is on their currency. That's why when you look at every piece of currency that we have, there's a white person's face on it, because white people have been chosen by the system of soulless beings to represent power. And since this system is the most dominant system and the white man's face have been used to represent the currency of this system, that's where you get the term white supremacy from. But see, that's a whole nother animal within itself. I would have to do hella podcasts about that. So now, since this system have been created, every ethnicity of people that have pale skin, just like the currency that we have, I didn't say race because there's only two races of people, and those are beings with souls and beings that don't have souls. And then it breaks off into subcategories from there. So every ethnicity of people with pale skin who have been chosen by the system of soulless beings through initiation, now they have access to a very, very lucrative power source, which is their currency. This is the reason why you have Mexican people who could be quote unquote white supremacists. This is why you can have Italian people who could quote unquote be white supremacists. This is the reason why you could have European or people from New England or people from Canada or Venezuela or whatever, and they can come to the United States, and if they got pale skin and they subscribe to the laws, statutes, and commands given by the system of soulless beings, that's the reason why a lot of these people can come here to the United States and rack up. They got access to outrageous amounts of money, business loans and building loans and land grants and all of this stuff, because if you subscribe to this system of soulless beings that they created, they have a power structure which is based on their currency that can be very, very rewarding. Now, with this system of soulless beings, there's a give and take to it, because the system itself needs a power source that it can plug into in order for its system to keep running. And this is where the men and women and children with souls, aka the solar beings, this is where they come in at. Because I'm gonna tell y'all this right now, just because you're a quote unquote black person doesn't mean that you got a soul. I mean, you may have a compartment where your soul was supposed to go, but that don't mean that there's anything in there. And these type of people are your quote unquote coons. And when I say coons, I mean somebody from even when they was little, they didn't like black people. It was just something about them that they just did not like. So since they spread that energy of hatred, they started to get that energy back. And for those type of black people, the system of soulless beings have a special job for people like that, because the universal code that this system of soulless beings has to go by is that they know that one day the pendulum may swing the other way, where every solar being on the planet just wakes up and they start to shoot their light up to the cosmos. And when that light comes back down on this world that we're living in now, it'll disintegrate them and their system. So the key is to keep the solar beings under a heavy, heavy state of hypnosis, so that on the back end, they can still use the energy from the solar beings to power up their system. But it's not so much to the point where the solar beings start to wake up and they start to get ideas and all of that, to the point where they start to take over. And what better voice to keep you in a state of hypnosis than a soulless being with brown skin? God damn, man. Whew. My allergies, man. My allergies just started to mess with me right quick, man. My bad, y'all. My bad. I don't know what that was. So the way it would work is, since us as solar beings are growing up in the system, and everything that we see that's of any power, or everything that we see that's of any authority, always have a white face on it. Subconsciously, we start to internalize that, and deep inside, we want to be the center of attention too, because we've been down in the bottom for so long and we're asleep, so we don't understand how powerful we truly are, and we're looking ourselves in the perception of the soulless beings who has us in mental and spiritual bondage anyway. We start to fashion our way of life, and we start to fashion a lot of things behind them, because at the end of the day, that's really the only thing that we can really see at this point in time. And this was back in the olden days, where the music and media manipulation was at its infancy stage. You would listen to the radio and you would see how that voice on that radio is spreading all across the world, and you think to yourself like, man, what I would do to get on the radio. And then you look at the TV and you start to watch these shows where big bands will be playing on the screen, and you start to kind of mimic their moves in your living room and singing with your hairbrush, and you be like, man, I know I could do way better than them if I was on the big screen. And you're struggling, and your family is struggling, and y'all going through all of this trauma, that you, that boy or that girl that has that real big talent, it don't really go farther than the church house. Now, back in the day, a few ways. Either one, the Joe Jackson way, or the Matthew Knowles type of way, where your parents start to see how talented you are, and they start to invest a lot of their energy into cultivating that talent and making it better, because in their mind, they're looking at their child as the way out of the struggle. And the messed up part about this is that could easily turn toxic, because your Beyoncés and your Selenas and your Aaliyahs and your Michael Jacksons, they were all very masterful at what they did. But on the flip side, a lot of them struggled with inward type of issues, And unbeknownst to the parents, because they don't really know no better, they're operating in a place of trauma and they see their children as a way out. But they don't know that when they give their children over to these soulless beings, aka Hollywood, all they're doing unknowingly is threw that innocent child in a pool filled with piranhas, ready to feast on that soul until there's nothing left. Because your soul is where your joy comes from. And if your solar body and your emotional body is working in unison, you're going to have that joy that I was talking about that the world didn't give to you. And the reason why the world didn't give it to you, because it didn't come from the world. It came from your soul. So everything that you do that comes from your soul, it's going to mean the most to you. That's why the soul music era was one of the greatest eras in music, because we wrote about things that we truly felt about in our soul. And when you speak from your soul, it's going to be relatable to everybody. And your soul, which is, when you spell it S-O-L, it means sun. And we all know that your soul is like a small piece of the sun that's housed within your body. When you're a light being and you're doing things from your heart and from your soul, that's what makes you a star. And that's just you knowing yourself. But now, when you take that energy of you as a star and you add the limelight to it, now the limelight is a very, very bright light, but too much of the limelight can be very, very draining to your natural light, because the limelight is an artificial light. But with both of these lights combined, now that's what makes you a superstar. And see, this is what the soulless beings can see when they see that singer or that struggling actor or something like that, that came from the ghetto, came from very, very struggling beginnings, but they got that light inside of them. And since they haven't been taught about how important and how pivotal that light is, the system of soulless beings who created something similar but artificial, which is called the limelight, it's easy for them to come to you with an offer to buy that light off of you, because you haven't been taught how valuable it is. So this is how things will work, because since the soulless beings know that since your soul is infinite and it's a universal type of thing, they can't take your soul the way it is. They have to dilute it in a way where it's still powerful, but it's easier for the soulless beings to be able to digest it as well as control it. So what they do is they give you a stage name, meaning, quote unquote, they give you an alter ego, and they make sure that they fill you up with so much positive energy, even though it's artificial. Every time you get on stage under your stage name and you got those flashing lights behind you and you're this superstar, so like moths to a flame, you got all of these people that's cheering for you and rooting for you, because these are people who not only love your light because you're singing or you're rapping from your soul, so it's already going to be relatable to everybody. It gets to the point where they start to get so addicted to your light, but your light is so bright, and because you're a superstar with the limelight too, you're so hot that subconsciously, in order for them to be in your light, they gotta fan themselves off. So that's where you get your fans from. Now the thing is, when you was just attracting people to you using your own solar light, those are going to be your true fans or your core fans. And everybody else who came on the scene once the limelight coupled with your solar light, that's where your other fans come from. But the thing about it is, once your light starts to diminish, a lot of those fans are going to end up falling off, and they're going to start to say that you fell off too. Now, all of this stuff that I just named for you in this analogy, it's called fame. And fame is more of a egotistical thing than anything else. And the soulless beings know that since even as a child, you've been pruned to already want to chase that fame due to the music and media manipulation. And since you were so gullible because the stuff that you're doing from your soul, which is something that's real, you don't feel like something as artificial as money should even be wrapped around it or should even deal with it, because pretty much what you was doing with your soul was something that you would do for free in general. When that soulless being writes up that contract, which is pretty much an agreement that you make with them, to where you promise to give them a piece of your soul for a certain period of time in exchange for fame, which is that artificial limelight that couples with your solar light. And the thing about it is, since you've never had fame before and you're not knowledgeable of the music business or anything like that, and when you first jump in, you don't really care about the money because you're already poor as it is, so money isn't really something that you would turn a deal like that down. because they done gas your head up so much on the fame side of the game that you don't think twice. You just sign the deal. So now you're on the high road. You got all the fame. Everybody knows your name. You're soaring high. And the thing about it is, these soulless beings created these trophies, milestones, and achievements in their game to keep you wanting to, quote unquote, sell your soul. Because every single time that you use your solar energy to fill up that alter ego that they created for you, that's connected to the limelight, every time you, quote unquote, make a hit record, you take a small little piece of your soul and you put it into that alter ego. And for the most part, the money, aka the currency that has the white people's face on it, that's real to the system of soulless beings, that currency is gonna go to people that looks like the face on that currency for the most part. And any little crumbs that they decide to shell out to you, you'll be happy for it, because I mean, it's more than what you're used to getting. That's what they're gonna tell you when you start to kind of complain about it a little bit. And then they'll give you little small things like houses, cars, send women your way, things like that to kind of keep you hypnotized. Because the more and more you, quote unquote, sell your soul, the more and more you start to lose yourself. That innocence start to get drained out of you. And the thing about that limelight is, since the soul is being controlled and created the limelight, they can make your limelight and make your fame expand and retract at will. And in order for you to balance it out the best way you can, you have to keep depositing bigger and bigger chunks of your solar energy into that alter ego, which is your stage name. And everything that you're told to do by the soulless beings while you're under that stage name, then it slowly gets to the point to where the real you is so disconnected to the alter ego that they created for you and that they control, that your fans start to only know you by the alter ego that you portray on the big screen. And a lot of your core fans, a lot of them start to still support you a little bit, but slowly they start to distance themselves away from you, because they start to say that you, quote unquote, sold out. And then it gets to a point where, as an artist, you're at a tug of war, because it's like every time that you try to do something that's purely solar, since your alter ego self now has so much power over your solar self, because you've been giving so much of your solar energy to it, it either gets shelved or falls on deaf ears. Because since the soulless beings are the ones that controls your alter ego, and your alter ego is what's making you famous, you trying to do something that doesn't involve their control of it is going against the agreement that you signed. So either that will happen, or the flip side, to where you start to lose a lot of fans. And the thing about it is, that system of soulless beings, they've already created different mechanisms of consequences. If you ever get to a point where you decide to be rebellious, you decide to think that you're bigger than your label or whatever, because as fast as you got the fame is the fastest that you'll lose the fame, because at the end of the day, it was all artificial to begin with. So it starts to get to the point in your life where your solar body is so drained from constantly giving out huge chunks of it to your alter ego. You start to internalize your alter ego, and you start to put full trust in that system of soulless beings, because you've lost yourself so much that you feel like you can't even do anything on your own. And this is when they really got you, because they know that you're at that point of desperation where you'll do anything for the limelight. You'll do anything to keep that fame, because fame is the only thing that matters to you. And sometimes this is the point of your life where you start to really question things like, where's all my money at? Where's all my royalties at? And then you get reminded of the agreement that you signed. And sometimes things can get a little bit more sinister, because just like there's a system of giving and receiving and reaping and sowing on the spiritual level, as above, so below. So you get to that low point in your life where you feel like your fame is starting to dwindle and your limelight is starting to die down. Spiritually, you're in that zombified state, and those soulless beings come to you and they like, look, what you're giving us isn't enough anymore. You're starting to be past your prime. So we need some currency from you if you're trying to get some currency from us. And I mean, sometimes, depending on who you are and what your status is, that can mean a plethora of things. Let's just say these are people, places, and things, or body parts that is close to you, that you love, that you can't see yourself living without, that are the only external things in their life that remind them of the solar being that they once was. Because those things hold a value to the soulless beings that's just as good, or in their eyes, just as succulent as your own solar energy. And even though you're desperate, you start to plead with them. Look, I'll pay you anything you want. I'll do anything you want. Just not that. Just not that. But see, the system of soulless beings, they created the currency to keep you hypnotized. So why the hell are they gonna accept something that they created themselves that's artificial as a form of payment? The form of payment has to be something that's real. And true love is real. Innocence is real. Righteousness is real. So that's the only thing that they're gonna accept from you. So it gets to the point where that person gives in, and he starts to give those things away to the soulless beings. And in exchange, they give him some of their currency. And along with that, since they know that your solar self is damn near dead, they gotta amp up the limelight. So that's how you have those superstars that it seemed like they fell off for a minute, but something happens to where unexpectedly someone in their family that they truly loved or something like that passed away. And then a little bit after that, they just rise right back up to stardom. And you start to notice that the music or whatever talent that they do, it's not the same by a long shot compared to the way it was when they first came out. And the reason why is because in a lot of situations, it's not them. See, when it gets to this part of the game, that's when songwriters and other people who's a part of the agenda comes in, that studies you and that has been knowing your style so long that they can recreate it. So that's why when you hear their music, it sounds like something that they would write, but it just feels like something is missing. And whatever that something is, it makes you almost not want to listen to it. But due to the music and media manipulation, playing the same song over and over and over and over, it gets to the point where you kind of start to like it a little bit. And then it gets to a point where you start to kind of like that new them. Now, this is usually the part in the artist's career where you start to see them get into a lot of trouble with the law. You start to see them having a lot of DUIs, having a lot of nervous breakdowns, having a lot of failed overdoses and all of that type of stuff, because it gets to the point where, like I said in my last video, once your soul has been drained so much that it's damn near non-existent, you start to slowly lose your will to live, because that's when you start to see that everything that you sold the little small parts of your soul to were actually illusions. They were actually artificial. And you start to really internalize that to the point where a lot of people commit suicide. A lot of people try to take the little bit of mustard seed of soul that they got left to try to whistle blow and go against the grain. And then they end up mysteriously dead, because once you get to this point in your career, the soulless beings, they pretty much wrote you off already. They didn't got to a point to where even if you self-destruct, or even if they have to put you down, you done gave them so much of you that not only are they going to be living off of your alter ego for many generations and years, they studied you so much to where they can create another you and another you and another you. So that way the feeding never ends. And when I say create another you and another you and another you, I'm not necessarily even talking about cloning. Just like how when Selena passed away, the alter ego known as J-Lo was created to take her place, meaning that Selena already laid the foundation energetically for the wave. She just passed away before she was able to ride her own wave. So J-Lo was created to ride Selena's wave. And since the soulless beings control the alter ego known as J-Lo, they can set that wave to whatever they want it to. Now, I'm only using these artists metaphorically just to explain this higher type of information. So back in the day, that's how a lot of these older type of artists, quote unquote, sold their soul to get fame and into the limelight. So then the soulless beings start to get a little smart. They was like, hold up, now let's bring politics into it. So now, since we have this rebellious Black Panther Party revolutionary spirit going on with these solar beings, we're going to create these things called political agendas. And pretty much we're just going to create an environment, which is going to be a project. And in these projects, we're going to take the best and the brightest out of these projects, and we're going to let them sing and rap about the stuff that's going on in those projects. And we're going to call that gangster rap. And then we're going to take the best and the brightest athletes out of the project that we created, and we're going to inflate their ego just like we had to inflate that basketball and that football so high. And since there's a lack of alpha male masculinity in these projects, the toxicity in their trauma bodies mixed with the limelight, they ain't going to want to come back to the project and do anything that's beneficial to them, especially since the people that we appointed which are the white people, are the pinnacles of success. So we bring them around these type of people. So now they feel like they're associated with success. And with a little music, media, manipulation, and hypnotism, we can keep these people asleep while draining their energy. So it got to the point where it got really, really hard to put the wool over a lot of these artists' eyes and stuff like that. They started being a lot more rebellious and all of that. So what the system Soulless Beings did, which was the same situation, they gave these rappers and artists music deals, but then politically, they wanted to make sure to paint a very, very negative image of the solar beings through the music and the media manipulation. So now it's getting to the point where slowly and slowly and slowly, we started to be the face of our own music and media manipulation, and the Soulless Beings and the white people, they started to kind of play the background. You know, we'll let you do all of the hard leg work and we'll just be in the background collecting our end of the bargain. So then it started to get to the part where you having to give up something that you love in exchange for fame started being the first thing that you would do before you even touch a certain threshold of their currency. Meaning that you could be doing okay on the chitlin circuit, but in order for you to even get on the radio and even get a little bit of fame, something has to happen, and all of a sudden after that something happens, now you're all the way in the limelight. And the reason why this was done is because the more and more we quote unquote progressed as a people, we slowly started disconnecting our emotional body and our solar body. That's why you have these quote unquote microwave rappers and these microwave singers that are here today just so they can promote a certain agenda politically, but then after they've been used up, they quote unquote fall off. So it got to the point where they started to accept that quote unquote payment up front before they gave you anything, because they knew for the most part, since you never really had time to develop that light, aka artist development, even with their limelight, you'll only be able to shine for a small period of time. And in a lot of ways, that's the generation of people that you see on your big screen now. These young men and young women, especially us solar beings, due to what the system of Soulless Beings have been creating for hundreds and hundreds of years. We grow up in some of the most toxic environments, and it's hard for us to get any real positive light from the music and the media manipulation, which is by design, because every image and voice that you hear looks and sounds like you. And now you start to internalize that. So now you think that the only way that you can really become famous in Hollywood as an artist, you have to follow after the wave of Cardi B, or you have to follow after the wave of Nicki Minaj, or you have to follow after the wave of Future, or you got to follow after the wave of XXXTentacion, who, when he passed away, he created a lane for a lot of these rappers to ride the wave on, and it all leads to the same destructive place. So moral of the story, don't sell your soul. Don't do it, because no matter what these soulless beings try to throw in your face when it comes to that fame and fortune, it ain't even worth it in the end. So before I leave y'all, I gotta tell y'all how bad this shit is now, man. And this goes strictly to what young Pharoh was talking about in his video, because when you quote unquote sell so much of your soul, but you're still a star, and you have to stay coming out and all of that stuff so that the soulless beings can keep collecting that currency from you. Let's take it back to spirit for a minute. You have these beings, I'll call them, and they're called intranquil spirits. Now, when you get into voodoo and you get into that real voodoo shit, that's when you'll learn about that. So just to give you a small synopsis, an intranquil spirit is pretty much a spirit that had a very, very traumatic type of life that it's hard for them to pass on to the other side, because trauma and pain holds a lot of energy. It's negative energy, but it's still a lot of energy. So their spirit body is too heavy for them to rise up and cross over to the other side. Either that, or when they was on Earth, they did so much heinous shit that they can't even really get into another baby body to be born back on this Earth. So the new age contract, you sign this shit and you give your solar energy to these beings and they create that alter ego for you, now you will be assigned your own personal intranquil spiritual parasite, and that spiritual parasite leeches off of that alter ego that was created for you. Now, how this spiritual intranquil parasite is installed inside of you, that's something that you would have to either go to young Pharoh and he'll tell you, or maybe I'll just have to create a Patreon or some shit, because that's too deep for YouTube. And that's all I'm gonna talk about when it comes to that. And two examples of that situation going on in artists is Nicki Minaj with Roman and Beyonce with Sasha Fierce. And these are the alter egos of your alter ego. And man, things get real crazy on that side of the game. But out of all of this, there is a positive thing that I can leave y'all with, because I can't lie, man. After I learned that information about getting into this industry and all of that kind of stuff, man, I really didn't want to do music anymore after that. I mean, shoot, I told y'all the story about when I was signed in Atlanta to OTS Records, and I had that shitty deal. I felt like I sold my soul then. So this shit right here had me mad paranoid. But to all of y'all inspiring artists and singers and rappers and musicians and all of that who still want to get a little fame and notoriety for the music that you have and all of that, if you know how to play this game correctly and you don't care about certain things, you can still be successful in this industry. You can, but it's gonna take 4 things, and if you do these 4 things, you'll have success in this industry and still have your soul in the end. Rule number 1, which is really the most important rule: you have to come into this game with some power, and I mean real power. If y'all seen my last live stream that I did before YouTube changed the rules, and I was saying if you want to expose this system, you better come into the game with some power. That's the type of power that I'm talking about, because that's the type of power, cosmic power, that the soulless beings can't feed on, because if they try to touch it or if they try to feed on it, they'll disintegrate. But see, I know everybody ain't on that type of level, which you should be. I don't know why you're not. All of this information that's out. But no matter what type of religion or moral system that you have, make sure before you call yourself trying to get into this industry, whatever it is, you stand firm on that. No matter what. No matter what these record executives try to get you to do, try to wean you off of it, try to make you do little small things that you wouldn't normally do. Because remember, it's a method to their madness, and they will test you. And as long as you stand firm and stand strong, you won't have anything to worry about. Now, you will get rejected a lot. I can't even lie. You may get rejected out of some very, very lucrative deals money-wise. But like I always say, if your joy is rooted in something that the world didn't give to you, you wouldn't be worried about money, simply because you know that if you keep on the path that you're on in that regard, you would get a divine opportunity. That'll be something successful for you, and also something that's aligned with your soul path. Rule number 2, study the business of music. I can't stress that enough. This is what our unsung artists fail to do, and that's what a lot of these new age artists who sign to these deals and stuff, it's like they're so happy to get that little check that they don't even think to read the contract. You should always have an entertainment lawyer on retainer, so when you get that big contract, you can look it over with them. But don't use that lawyer as your crutch. You should still know different terminologies, and you should still know different lingos and stuff like that when it comes to this business of music. And you don't even have to necessarily go to school to learn it. You got Google University and YouTube Community College to help you out with that. There is no reason that any new age, new generation, age of Aquarius raised person that's getting into this music industry should get fucked over, because unlike the artists of old, we know better, and y'all know better. Don't let these record executives control your masters. And if they want to control your masters and all of that, that means that they feel like you need them more than they need you. So that means that you need to come with some more power so that you can have more negotiating power, or just be independent and do it that way. So that way you can have 100%, or at least a bigger percentage of your profits anyway. Rule number 3, always operate in a place of your soul. What that means is be original, be authentic, be you. Don't go out here trying to do what's popping. Don't go out here trying to do things that revolve around trends. Don't go out here doing music that revolves around someone else's wave, someone else's success. Because when they fall off, you're gonna fall off, and you're gonna end up being a one-hit wonder that sound like something that somebody else got out. And that's the worst thing to be identified as an artist, especially a new artist. Shoot, look at the 05, 06, 07 dance era, snap and roll era. You had people like Soulja Boy, T-Pain, Young Dro, and a couple other rappers who was able to ride that wave for what it was, but they were so original to the point where when that wave started to die down and turn into something else, those artists were still able to do something authentic in that wave. Now, think about groups like D4L and Fabo, and whatever group they created, Crank That Batman. Whatever group created, Crank That Lion King. whatever group created Crank That Spider-Man and all of those other Crank That's, since they was riding the wave of Soulja Boy, which made the original Crank That, when that single died down, all of those other songs crashed and burned along with it. But you see somebody like Michael Jackson, who pretty much kept damn near his same authentic style from the 80s and just added a few little new age nuances to it, but you could still hear the authenticity and originality in Michael Jackson's music. Michael Jackson was still alive in 05, 06, and you didn't hear Michael Jackson coming out with a Crank That Moonwalk or Crank That Michael or whatever. So take it from him. The more original your music is, the more timeless your music is, the more it stands the test of time, because you're the only one like you. And as long as you stay original like that and authentic like that, no one will be able to replace you. And when they do, people are gonna know where they got their style from. And last but not least, you have to be okay with not getting all of the achievements, trophies, and milestones that the system of soulless beings award the artists who did sell their soul. Meaning, don't let that define your artistry. And this is something that we as a people, we have to kind of stop putting down our fellow independent underground artists just because they never won the Grammy, just because they've never been on terrestrial radio, just because they've never been on these different award shows and stuff like that, just because they're not on Love and Hip Hop. That doesn't mean that they haven't made it. But you have to understand, just like I said in that video, it takes a fool to learn the game. Every game has its own set of trophies, achievements, and milestones. But in order for you to even play the game, it's like an arcade. You gotta put a coin in, or you might have to put 2 coins in order to start playing the game. And metaphorically, that coin that you put in that game is your soul, or a piece of it anyway. And just like if you lose the game, you can't push the little button and get your coin back. Just like in that game, if you lose someone close to you, or if you lose your fame or whatever, you can't renegotiate your contract when you're already too deep in. You can't bring that person back, because now you had to change your heart, and now you know that their life was way more important than that check. So let me stop, because I don't want to get too deep, but y'all got the gist of what I'm talking about. And if y'all haven't, there's so many videos out there going way deeper than I did. Like I said, Young Pharoh made a video talking about this as well, so check out his channel. And that's all I wanted to talk about. Hopefully y'all got something out of that. I know this is a little long-winded to be a rant, but I really feel like I needed to come out and really put perspective to this whole selling your soul thing, because you have people that say it as a scare tactic, but when you tell them to go deeper with the subject, they can't really go any deeper. And I don't want y'all thinking that this music industry is 100% bad. At the end of the day, it's what you make it. And as long as you come into this game with some power and knowledge, you can be very successful in this industry. Just don't get played. That's all. All right, y'all. Till next time, BandClap TV, we out.